The one piece of advice that I think I need to give everybody, though, in the social hour, unless you have a half hour to waste, don't ask anybody how they feel. Okay, guys, let's get to something serious. Yesterday was a real wild day for me. They're putting in a new kitchen in my house, and I can't find a damn thing. I don't know where the hell it is. And there's drywall dust everywhere. But in the midst of that, the speaker that we had planned, nobody could find. I started to get visions of, geez, maybe he's in Iraq or, you know. But anyway, he was sick, but we really hit a home run. Because instead of Colonel Waller, who was the head of maintenance, we got the commander for the whole base. I know this is a non-military term, but we got the head honcho. But anyway, Col Robinson, I spoke to him yesterday for the first time. This man has 6,500 hours in a C-17. I think he's pretty well, 25 years in the Air Force, right? But you know what the bottom line is? The bottom line is this. These are the people that keep us safe and preserve the privileges that we take for granted. These are the guys that do it. So please give Col Robinson a warm welcome.
Well, when they asked me to come out and speak, this microphone works pretty good. I kind of talk close, so if anybody in the back can't tail off and you can't hear me, raise your hand and I'll try to speak up. My wife would be laughing. I'm speaking a low talker in front of a room full of people who are probably hearing challenged in some respects. So I don't know where to begin. I'm still getting used to being, the head honcho. Been in the seat for about 2 months. Got the assumption of command on the 1 or 2 November, and have certainly been impressed with this area since I got here. I mean, the warm welcome from everybody, from the communities, from the base. Pittsburgh is an awesome area, in my opinion. Lots of history here, lots of veterans, lots of patriotism, and few people that you got a football team here apparently, and they like their Steelers. We don't even do UTA on the first week of February because you might be in the Super Bowl, so it's always a different weekend. To give you a little bit of my background. I'm originally, I'd say, from the Carolinas, born in North Carolina next to Fort Bragg, a military post, Army post out there. Lived there till I was 12, moved to South Carolina, Aiken, South Carolina, and then went to a little school in the corner of the state called Clemson. Might have heard about it recently. I went to school, didn't know what I wanted to do, didn't know my way in life, did some struggles, took a year off from college, went back, and to make a long story short, eventually found ROTC, Air Force ROTC, got involved in that, and got an ultimatum by my college professor in graduate school. Said, hey, I know you got to do graduate work or you got to do this Air Force thing. I know you've been sidetracked by it, but you got to make a decision. I said, see ya. I'm going off to the Air Force, and never looked back. And for me, it's been great. I went commissioned out of ROTC at Clemson, went to pilot training at Reese Air Force Base in Lubbock, Texas. The base realignments and closures, that one was closed in 1994, 95. So it was a great base. Lubbock, Texas is a great area. And then I got reassigned back to Pope Air Force Base in North Carolina, Fort Bragg, as a maintenance officer. So at the time I went to pilot training, they trained more pilots than they had airplanes to send people out to. So roughly 2/3 of our class went to another job for 2 years, 2.5 years, before they went back to flying. So I went to Pope during the, we call it the composite wing experience. They had C-130s there, which C-130s were formerly at Pittsburgh here. They moved A-10s there, which has been a venerable aircraft that the Army just loves. They always feel comfortable when they can hear a Warhawk flying over, or an AC-130. And then they put F-16s in there. So I did maintenance on C-130s and F-16s for those 2.5 years. I figured if I was going to fly them one day, I want to know what it took to keep them in the air. And got a great education as far as maintenance was concerned, and got a lot of opportunities to fly in airplanes that I would have never have had the opportunity to experience. When time came to go back to flying, C-17s became available, and I knew that if I put that on my dream sheet to go back to flying, I was going to get it, and it was going to Charleston. And when I got there, they only had 8. And military doesn't just buy airplanes that go up and fly. We got lots of attachments and different systems on them that the military needs, communications, and others. So the C-17 was challenged in the beginning, and Congress decided, hey, we're only going to buy 40 at this point until y'all straighten until at the time, make sure I get it right. It's not Lockheed, it's not Boeing. McDonnell Douglas, thank you. McDonnell Douglas is the one originally proposed it and built it. Boeing eventually bought them out, and it's now considered a Boeing product. But we did a maintenance and operations reliability test on it, and it passed that test so well that Congress decided, okay, it's passed that test, and now we're going to buy 120, and we'll see where we go from that. Is this working for y'all? I keep hearing it cut down.
Yep.
Away from your mouth a little bit, that way you won't get that.
Move it away from my mouth, I won't.
No,
Just a little bit.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, we'll see. So they said, okay, we'll go to 120. They eventually went to 240, and now today we have a little over 240 C-17s in the Air Force inventory, and almost half of those now are in the Guard or Reserve, and active duty having the others. There's also Australia, Dubai, India, Britain, and I think there's 2 other countries out there that have also purchased them or leased them in some arrangement to use the C-17s. And when I got there was 8. Now there's 200. Now there's 240. we at the Pittsburgh Air Reserve Station will end up with 8 airplanes. Right now we have 4. We actually have 3 out there. They're in various stages of maintenance somewhere or the other, or being housed on another base while our ramp is being completed out there. If you've been by the airport, you probably have seen the 2-bay hangar out there. It's a giant new structure that will eventually facilitate the maintenance for 2 airplanes. One side is the fuels, and the other side will be the home station check and periodic maintenance that's got to be done on the airplanes. When we transitioned to the C-17, we increased the number of full-time reservists out there by 201 positions, which is approximately 65% increase. Yeah, I think that'll probably work better.
Yeah, I know.
Communication is everything, you know. We're halfway around the world somewhere. We need to be able to get in touch with command and control. I'll tell you a quick story about that in a minute. But so our mission out there, as we say, I got a few note cards on it from some of the things we do. Provide mission-ready C-17 airlift and air medical evacuation and agile support for the United States Department of Defense. Our vision's I love forging steel airmen for America's sword and shield. I love being in the Pittsburgh area. I love the play on words there that they've come up with. Roughly, we have about 1,600 men and women out there maintaining, flying, supporting, doing whatever it may take. We have basically 4 groups: maintenance support group, which takes care of everything, non-flying for the most part. Civil engineering, fire department, security forces, communications, dining hall, gym, airport, and that kind of falls under the umbrella of force support. We have the operations group, which comprises the flying squadron, roughly about 100 pilots and loadmasters out there that take the airplane around the world. Right now we can have airplanes scattered across the globe. I think we have one out that was in some leg way between here and Bahrain. We have a couple of airplanes out at March Air Force Base in California, and a couple of them down in Robinson Air Force Base in Georgia, getting some long, heavy-duty maintenance taken care of on them before they come up here. So the flying squadron takes care of moving them and moving equipment. I always describe as, C-130 is a tactical airlifter, and they deploy to a theater and they move stuff around within the theater. C-17, I describe it as the, it's strategic, but I describe it as the taxi for the warfighter. So we're constantly moving back and forth from the States to wherever we're going, and we have long legs. It's kind of funny. Sometimes I'll tell people, they say, "What'd you do this weekend?" I said, "I went to Afghanistan." They're like, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, "I went to Afghanistan." I know you didn't. We take off Monday or Friday. We go through Pope Air Force Base, pick up Special Forces Group, and go from there into Ramstein, land in Ramstein, 6 in the morning, take off 11 o'clock at night. You can't sleep during the day. I don't know why they call that crew rest. Fly down to Afghanistan and back, crew rest again, take off Monday morning and be back in stateside on Monday evening. So from 4 days and going halfway around the world and back, and that's just we talk about doing locals, and we just take it for granted. We do a local pattern sortie. We could take off from here, fly down to Louisville, Kentucky, meet up with the tanker, pass gas at 1,000 gallons a minute, do our training on the tanker, fly down to South Carolina, do some tactical pattern work there or over at Wright Pat, and then back up to Pittsburgh, and we do that all in a span of about 4.5 hours. So, we're all up and down the eastern seaboard and around the globe on any given day. We also, in that, have air medical evacuation, and that's our flight nurses and med techs that train to take care of the warfighter in the back of the airplane. So if you see people that are injured or wounded, and battlefield medicine has advanced tremendously in the last 20 years, and particularly in these fights. So we've got the medical supplies out there called Quick Clot, and they put that on a wound. They say that they, when they developed it, they could stab a pig in the aortic artery, put that on there, and it would save the pig's life. That's how they started, working on that. When we did the invasion into Afghanistan and preparing for the invasion in Iraq, we had a flight doc fly with us at one point, and he was going around to different bases in the theaters to tell the special forces guys about this Quick Clot. And the reason he had to tell them about it was because it was derived from human blood sources, which then could possibly have some other side effects that they needed to be told about in case they ever had to use the Quick Clot. So that has facilitated many guys making it back home that wouldn't have made it during World War II or the Korean War or Vietnam. Our air medical evacuation personnel take care of those soldiers and airmen as they come from the theater to Landstuhl Medical Center, generally in Ramstein, Germany, and then back to the States, either into San Antonio or Bethesda, Maryland, for the medical care that they receive. Most recently was from Charleston Air Force Base in South Carolina. They had a critically wounded soldier from the battlefield in Afghanistan. Air medical evacuation personnel went out in the helicopter. They treated that person en route back to Bagram Air Base, and in Bagram Air Base, they stabilized them. We also have on our base Air Medical Staging Squadron, which provides a stabilization effort. It's basically a MASH hospital to provide en route transit care, and then they're put on the airplane. That airplane took that one soldier, double air refueling, from Afghanistan to San Antonio to, he's saved his life. So I can say in my lifetime I've seen a lot of things like that happen. Friends that were taken off out of Hawaii got redirected into a small island in the Pacific to take somebody's newborn child from that island, air refuel, to San Antonio to receive the care that they need in order to save that infant's life. So it's very rewarding to be able to be a part of missions like that and know that at the end of the day you made a difference in somebody's life. We also have the maintenance group. Of course, you can't get up in the airplane if they're not taken care of, and those maintenance guys work hard every day to make sure, one, they're learning a new airplane and how to take care of it. And sometimes it's a little tricky. C-17 has 66 computers on board, and they're monitoring different systems in the airplane. And sometimes, just like your computer at home, just like your newsletter gets sent to spam, sometimes electrons go haywire in the airplane, and we're getting some faults on the indicator up front on the airplane, and they just won't go away, and nobody can do anything. And we're like, we're in a place we're not going to stay here, so what are we going to do? And we do what we call the equivalent of control alt delete. We take all the power off the airplane, we bring it down to what we call a black jet, we fire it back up, and lo and behold, that fault has gone away. People are saying, are you not worried about taking the airplane in the air after that? And I'm like, it's electronic. If it fails in the air, we've got 3 more, and it's gonna be okay. And if all those fail, it still flies, and then the engine still works. So, just go back to the Wright brothers doing windage and looking at the waves and stars and trying to figure out where we're going. We'd be hard pressed to do that. And I talked about the ASTS, our Air Medical Staging Squadron. They can go out with 10, 50, or 100-man tents in order to provide transient hospital care for those soldiers as they go through and are transitioned out of theater back to more permanent care back in the States. I will say that I used to say until about 2.5 years ago, I joined the Air Force to see the world, and except for a year in pilot training in Texas, I'd been stationed in North and South Carolina for 22 years. I did see the world, and I have seen the world. Sometimes only 3 hours at a time, which for places like Afghanistan and Iraq and others that some people have more colorful names for, that's a good thing. Drop people off, we can come back out. Rarely do we ever stay there. But it certainly gives you a sense of what our brothers in arms do when they're on the ground. The Army, Marines, Navy. My hat's off to all the services, and I have great respect for the Coast Guard, and now the Space Force. We have space cadets out there now, so and they're putting out a call that anybody wants to join. So. So I will say, I have seen the world through the C-17 windshield, and I'm biased in it, and I think y'all will probably agree. We live in the greatest country in the world.
Yes, sir.
Some people might take exception to that, and you can debate it over your beverage of choice, but the United States goes out there and provides freedom and hope.
And we can debate it.
And we can debate it, and we are free to debate it. And we provide freedom and hope for people around the world. I talked mostly about warfighting stuff in my presentation so far, but we also provide humanitarian relief, either in hurricanes, taking water and supplies, food, whatever, to locations in the Caribbean, the United States, wherever it's needed. We have even, as the United States of America, taken relief supplies, medical and otherwise, into Iran when they had their their earthquake. I believe it was in the mid-2000s, 2005 timeframe. So, we see suffering. We want somebody to have that suffering relieved. I stayed in South Carolina for 22 years. I was 5 years in Charleston for active duty. Got out and went to the reserves. As a reservist, I have more say over where I go and when. I stayed there for 17 years as a reservist. It's a long story, but I'll say that somebody gave me a little too much adult beverage one night, convinced me to finish Air War College, and the next thing I knew, I was living in a van under a bridge down by the runway in Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Got promoted to colonel, and stayed there for 2 years, and then most recently have been assigned to Pittsburgh, and very glad that I'm here. My family is still down in Charleston, South Carolina. 22 years there, you grow deep roots. My daughter was a sophomore in high school when I started this adventure. First thing she asked me was, "You're not going to ask me to move, are you?" I said, "Nope, I'm not going to do that to you." She turned 18 on Tuesday. She's graduating high school, and she hopes to attend Clemson as well. My son is at Clemson now, and he's a 20-year-old, and we debate a lot. He's a college student. Prefrontal cortex hadn't solidified, and I'm waiting for that to happen. But it's good. We're engaging in conversation, so it's good. I think for the most part that probably covers it. I'm sure there's lots of questions out there, and I'd rather y'all ask the questions and me answer and get to what y'all want to hear about.
Wait a second. You have to bring this bird up.
Give it here.
There we go. Okay. Let George ask the first question.
Okay, I get the privilege because United States Air Force 1961 to 65 and Vietnam veteran. And so glad to see you got C-17s here. because when I was in Vietnam, we had C-123s and C-130s later. Two questions. The McDonnell Douglas C-17 had serious fuel leak problems when they first came to be tested and in the inventory. Are you experiencing, or have you had that experience with the current batch, and has that been totally cleaned up? A maintenance question.
Maintenance question. So it's fuel leaks. With what we do with the airplanes, I will say there's always going to be fuel leaks because the tanks are sealed. Most recently, when I was at Wright Pat, we had a C-17 that took off out of Ramstein, and they had a pretty serious fuel leak coming into the cargo bay, so they turned around and landed. It turns out the C-17 is the center wing box was never, I won't say never, it was originally planned to eventually someday be plumbed as a fuel tank. When that occurred, they had in this particular one, they had a bad batch of sealant that they used. So they told us to go, hey, the plane's fixed, come pick it up. So, or Wright Pat, me and a co-pilot and a loadmaster went over and picked it up. Long story short, the airplane can carry 240,000 pounds of fuel. That's with the center wing box and the wings. In the wings alone, it carry 180,000 pounds of fuel. What's that mean to y'all? You probably drive a car, an average tank per, your average car, a tank per week. That would fuel your car for 26 years. So, and we use that amount from here to Germany on any given flight. So that's a lot of fuel. So we went over there, we picked it up. We were trying to go directly back to Wright-Patterson. They said they had cargo, or they wanted us to stop in Portsmouth. And I didn't argue about it too much because I didn't want to test their work crossing the Atlantic. When I got back to Wright Pat, we returned without incident, got back to Wright Pat. Maintenance was a little miffed at me that I didn't fill it up and give it a test on the way back. I said, it's not my first time flying this thing. So they said, well, we're going to load it up. We're going to let it go out on the local on Thursday night. I said, well, if you're going to do that, I'd rather you do it on this local, which is just pattern only versus the one going up to the tanker, because I'm not convinced that it's not going to leak. They filled it up on the one going to the tanker. It never got off the ground because it was leaking in the cargo bay. So they ended up having to go back in and re-caulk all the seams and do some extensive work on it.
Is it a continuing chronic problem? That's what I'm really asking.
It's a continuous issue, not necessarily a problem and not chronic in my opinion. The airplanes with the wings flex up to 8 feet, depending on the weight of the airplane. So with that, there's always going to be an opportunity for some type of, crack or leak, or and that sealant gets brittle over time and has to be replaced. So it's just one of those things.
We have a C-123 up at the Air Heritage Museum in Beaver County, and the fuselage leaks with rain and water and everything coming in. Second part of the question. Me and my fellow Navy veteran Barry Lipson, Barry, you still awake? We're in attendance at a Veterans Breakfast Club that you guys hold at the 9/11th. And you guys were in the midst of the reconstruction of the base to handle the C-17. This was like 2 years ago. Is that construction project finished yet for all the facilities, or has there been delays?
Oh, I wish it was finished. Yeah, but no. One quick one on, flew on C-47s, DC-3s in my college days skydiving. And they said if the DC-3 is not leaking oil when you get on it, don't fly it because it's out of oil. So to the construction, we went to the Veterans Breakfast in December and really enjoyed that. And to me, it was living history and learning a lot about everybody's experience in their branch of service. So the 2-bay hangars, the big hangar that most everybody can see when they're going through there, and we got some issues that we're trying to work with that, make sure it's right by the time when we take possession of it, so that we don't have to keep. We're hoping to keep working on that, but we're hoping to have it by February. But we were hoping to have it by November. So, you know, sometimes construction projects get delayed. So, and I can't think of his last name, Todd. DePastina, thank you. Has talked to us about having a veterans breakfast out there later. He talked about September, but we have a pretty big inspection coming up, exercise that will be in September, so we'll have to kind of see where we land with that one.
Well, he's taking a bunch of us Vietnam vets back to Vietnam next month.
Really?
For 2 weeks.
Nice.
And so he won't be free until March. So.
Okay.
George, I heard he's going to leave you there, though.
Okay, Barry?
Yes, I might as well, excuse me, my mouth is dry. I might as well bring up the two timely subjects and see if you want to speak or avoid them. What is your thoughts about Boeing after the recent emails and things that were released about them doing the Mickey Mouse job of training pilots for the new plane, the one that's grounded now? And any comments on the Ukrainian plane that didn't quite make it out of Iran?
Iran. So, referencing the 737 MAX, I'm vaguely aware of some of the issues surrounding that. I have a lot of friends that fly that airplane for various airlines, and I think, in my opinion, Boeing makes a solid product. The issues for those airplanes that crashed were identified and were the solution for that was training for the pilots. I know that one of the airlines that had one of the airplanes crash, the training that is done in the United States was in the simulator. The training that was done at that airline was on a iPad with a 2-hour CBT, computer-based training. So there's a balance there on how it should have been taken care of and the better way to do it. And again, you know, I've flown a C-17 for years. When it was a new airplane, we were finding out stuff every day. As a new airplane and electronics and programming those systems, what were they? Easter eggs. There would be an Easter egg that we would find at various times. We never knew that was going to happen. Never thought that could occur. You know, sometimes middle of the Atlantic, all the screens go black. Not a regular occurrence, but it's certainly one that you remember. And what are we going to do now? They came back. It all fired up. It all came back together. But in software, and a quick story about that. My son and I were talking one time. I said, I watched the first space shuttle take off. I said, and it didn't take off for a reason I never heard about, and I couldn't understand why it didn't take off. And I said, when I tell you, you're going to laugh. He goes, well, why didn't it take off? I said, the software wasn't working. I'm like, what's software? I've never heard the word. He goes, you didn't know what software was? I said, never heard it. A brand new word, brand new term. So that's the answer to the first one. So the second one, you have to watch the news. It certainly seems, from what is being reported, and I have no better source right now than CNN, Fox News, or MSNBC, that, the Iranians were in a heightened state of alert, and they, it appears that they took down an airplane. The jury is out on that one. We'll see.
What is the heaviest cargo load that the C-17 can carry, and how far can it go without refueling?
Heaviest cargo load, it can carry up to 171,000 pounds of cargo. Generally, something maxes out the volume of the cargo bay before it maxes out the weight. One of the heaviest things that we carry that would not do that is the M1 Abrams tank. So they roll that on there, and when it rolls on there, the whole airplane moves. I mean, it's just like, okay, they're pulling it on now. And they chain it down. You have to have chains on it with 4 times the weight of that thing. So, I mean, when they strap that thing down, there are chains everywhere. It looks like a spider web. But it's only 140,000 pounds, so then they can put 2 support vehicles behind it, strap those down as well. Things that have carried on the C-17, I carried the Mars Surveyor satellite one time from Peterson Air Force Base to the shuttle landing facility at NASA and on the coast of Florida. I have carried tanks, Humvees, troops, food pallets, put them on pallets we can roll on, roll off. I have friends that took Kiko the whale from Seattle, Washington back to Iceland, where he was released to the wild. Never was released to the wild per se, he was really kept in a pen, but he never learned to feed himself. Never really was able to do that again. Dolphins, we carry dolphins sometimes. Navy uses them for various things. Interesting part of Kiko the whale, of course, he's a whale, so he has to live in a tank with seawater. But when you take off, all that water in the tank wants to go to the back of the airplane, and it looked like a water fountain in there the first time they tested that. So they would put him on there, they got him settled, they're getting ready for takeoff, they would pump the water out of the tank, his tank, into a sealed tank so that it wouldn't erupt everywhere. And then when they got up to cruise, they would put the water back in the tank. It was about an 8-hour flight to Iceland. Getting ready to descend, took the water back out so that when they landed, it was it didn't shower. Salt water on metal causes a lot of corrosion. So
You might have already answered this question. On those flights to Afghanistan, did you have to do any mid-air refueling or not?
sometimes we did, sometimes we did not. In the early stages of Afghanistan operations, we didn't have a lot of places that we could go to refuels, and they didn't have fuel supplies in theater to be able to, enough to be able to give us the amount of fuel we needed. So sometimes we would go in, refuel on the way in, so we'd have enough to get back out, or refuel on the way out so that we would get back to our locations.
So if you did, it was once?
Yes.
On the C-17s, I'm told that you gave up short runway takeoffs and landings versus your 130. Is that true, or did they compensate for the difference?
So the fuel C-17 is not very quote-unquote fuel efficient because we got a lot of stuff hanging out there to facilitate short field landings. The minimum runway for a C-17 is 3,500 feet by 90 feet wide, which is a pretty small runway. First time I saw it, I'm like, we're landing there? Really? And it can generally stop on about half the distance depending on the load and how much cargo is in the back of the airplane. The minimum runway for a C-130 is 3,000 feet. So it's a very small difference between and a 50-foot runway. And the width of the runway is based on the width of our landing gear. We 32 feet with the landing gear, and then we're given a leeway on either side in case we lose an engine during takeoff.
First off, I want to thank you for your service in keeping us all safe.
Thank you.
I've got thousands of hours in Airbus aircraft, fly-by-wires. The C-17 a fly-by-wire. I also have experienced the dark cockpit at 30 West, and it does get your attention.
It is a fly-by-wire aircraft. We have 4 flight control computers, and if those 4 go out, we have cable backup. And
Okay.
it's a 5 times redundant system.
Yeah, that's about a lot, the same as Airbus, only we don't have cable backup.
Yeah.
It's mechanical backup just for the elevator and, or rather the stabilizer and the rudder. That's it, basically. But you can still fly the aircraft.
Yeah. It's a great airplane. Yeah. One of the interesting things the C-17 can do, strategic brigade airdrop. So we can take, and you saw recently the troops that got sent off to Iraq and other places in the Middle East. So we have the airborne, Army Airborne. As I say, I went through airborne school 4 years ago. It was a great experience. People are like, why in the heck would you want to do that at 51? I'm like, because they let me. But part of the airborne creed, make sure I get it right, famed for deeds in war, renowned for readiness in peace. So we have that force sitting there, and a lot of people say, oh, we'll never use it. But countries around the world know it's there, and they know that within 72 hours, the United States can deliver 20 C-17s filled with Army Airborne to any location in the world and knock on their door. And they're not there to sell Avon. They're there to take care of business. So part of that capability is that the airplanes, the systems in the airplanes with TCAS and Mode S can all communicate, and they can all fly in formation, more or less follow the leader, 100 airplanes in the weather in formation, and you can put it on autopilot and sit and eat your box lunch while you're watching the airplane fly. So it's an amazing capability.
I worked at 9/11 for 20 years. During that time, we had 3 base closures. Is the 9/11 here to stay?
It is here to stay. 3 attempted base closures, right? Yes. So that's a point of pride for a lot of people, because a lot of people in the community saved it, and the people on the base saved it, and it's here to stay. It's not going anywhere.
Couple questions. You said you fly SF. Did you put anybody out on a wingsuit?
I have not. I've certainly done
Halos, yeah.
Halo or HAHO drops, high altitude, high opening. But they didn't have wingsuits on.
Okay.
Okay, we've got a bunch more questions.
First of all, again, I want to reiterate what that gentleman said. Thank you for your service. As a Navy veteran, one of the things that have separated the U.S. military from all the military in the world is our ability to keep things running. And my question to you is, how many hours of maintenance is required on a C-17 for each hour you in the air?
That's a good question. You ever notice people say that's a good question when they don't have an answer to it? I will have to ask. I know that as far as the pilots are concerned, they come in 2 hours and 15 minutes or 2 hours and 45 minutes before takeoff. Maintenance has a sequence that starts 6 hours before takeoff in order to get the plane ready. Fuel, load, releasing, doing all the inspections that need to be done in order to get the airplane ready to safely take off. But that doesn't count the number of hours that it's in a hangar, getting every 6 months getting a home station check inspection done, or doing their pre-flight inspection, which can be that inspection can good up to 72 hours, and then the pilots come back and they've broken something, so they got to fix that sometimes. I will get the answer to that from our maintenance officer, and I'll get back with Jerry on it, and he'll have that answer for you the next time. How about that?
Is the Air Force playing any role with the Australian fires as far as ferrying
equipment over there or medical evacuations or anything?
I don't know specifically the answer to that. I saw this morning that some firefighters went into a commercial airport and they had a resounding greeting when they got there, so that was heartwarming. But we do regularly have C-17s going in and out of Richmond, Australia, to support and supply some NASA sites out in the outlying areas of Australia. And I don't, it's a good question. I don't know if those areas have been affected by the wildfires.
I've heard that the C-17 is not going into the U.S. inventory anymore, but it's being sold internationally. What is the replacement for the C-17, if there is one, or where are we right now?
So they have quit manufacturing C-17s. They do have the assortment of countries that do have some before they quit production. And at this point, to my knowledge, there's no replacement planned. And I'll say the C-17's done such a great job, and I'm biased in that, such a great job in what the Air Force needs. And it's such a solid airplane strategically that right now I don't see, there will eventually be a need and there will eventually be another one. With the trouble that C-17 had when it came along, some of the sources they looked at were possible transitions or modifications to existing 747s and using those for cargo. And we do have the craft. Civilian Reserve Air Fleet that FedEx, UPS carry cargo for us, and they've even done it in Afghanistan and Iraq, and DHL and others. And then Delta, United, and American all also are out there on the Civil Reserve Fleet to be able to take troops and passengers out to theater. So to follow on to your question, we got the KC-135. KC-46 is the newest airplane built by Boeing. It's a 767, and it's a refueling aircraft. For the KC-135 and the B-52, KC-135 they expect will go to 100 years on their airframes. So the interesting thing is that I hear say, and it's true, the pilot that flies the last KC-135 to the boneyard has yet to be born. So, and we regularly refuel with them that are 60 years old, 60 years plus.
You almost answered my question. That has to do with the oldest in-service plane that we have. Is it the B-52?
I would have to look at tail numbers and time frames, but it's either the B-52 or the KC-135.
And how old are they, and how reliable are they from the standpoint of continuing service?
Both of them 60 plus years old. Refueled with the KC-135 recently. It was 62 years old. Interesting on the B-52, they recently pulled a B-52 out of the boneyard. They refurbed it and got it back into commission. I think it took a 6-month period of time. So it had sat out in the boneyard for who knows how long. And I don't know if you've seen the pictures. I remember seeing pictures in Air Force Times where for the strategic arms reduction talk treaties that we had, as the United States had to put the B-52s in the boneyard. They had to chop the wings off in 3 places in the fuselage and let them lay out in the desert so that the Russian satellites could pass over and ensure that they were destroyed. So not all of them were done that way, and it's amazing to me that they took that venerable airplane and brought it back to life.
Colonel, one last question for me. The C-123 was remarkable that it could do short takeoffs and landings. And I had the experience when I was in Vietnam to have taken off in a tactical takeoff that I didn't know the pilot was going to do. And my face was up against the window of the fuselage looking down at the water at about 20, 30, 40 feet below. as he took off from Denai. I know that your C-17 can do that. Have you ever done a tactical landing and takeoff?
Yes. So many times in different areas and locations. So it's unique to the C-17, not necessarily unique, but I have landed on dirt, which for jet engines, is not necessarily the best thing in the world, sandblasting and eroding the engine away. But they were designed to do that. And when you do that, we have reverse thrust on the engines that we can back the airplane up with the reverse thrust. But when you do the dirt landing with that reverse thrust to stop the airplane, the bottom third of the engine is blocked, so it doesn't blow the dust up and make it come up into the engine as much. And over the years, we've, Afghanistan, we'd go down to Bagram and we would land, and of course we bombed out the runway going in there. So they were repairing the runway, and sometimes we'd land on this half of the runway, sometimes we'd land on that half of the runway, sometimes this end, sometimes that end. Sometimes we didn't, we'd go down there and have to be very careful about what part of the runway we were landing on, because we had to make sure we weren't on the holy part and not be able to take off again.
You mentioned flying in formation. Does that save fuel?
There are geometries that Boeing has looked at in fuel and energy savings that they can take two airplanes, fly them in a certain geometry, and I think it's probably about 16% fuel savings based on riding the wave of the airplane in front of them.
Are C-17s equipped to land and take off from carriers?
I would volunteer to do it. I haven't convinced anybody yet to do it. They did it with a C-130. C-130's now Admiral Flatley landed a C-130 on an aircraft carrier back in the late 60s, early 70s. I think with the new carriers, no, he did it. He did it several times. I think with the new carriers and the size and layout of the decks, it could easily be possible. They get a 30-knot headwind going across the deck. We can take off. We can take off at let's say 95 knots. That would be 60 knots, and we could get that in less than 1,000 feet, which is the length of the deck. I think the superstructure would be something that would worry somebody. I'd give it a shot.
Okay, Colonel Robinson, thank you, and big applause. Great presentation.
I meant to ask in the beginning, anybody that's been in the military, just show of hands real quick. So, oh yeah. And I want to thank you for your service. Wherever branch, whatever operation, you all know the sacrifices you have made. And, sometimes I can't believe they pay me to do what I do. I love what I do, but I thank you for your services.
Okay, thank you, Colonel. Big applause. Okay, our meeting's adjourned.